So, dear beloved, what is your prognosis about our sorry state as humanity that we've brought ourselves to this apocalyptic time?
Well, I am so relieved that you said the word apocalyptic, because I have been calmly but relentlessly challenging all of the teachers to really tell the truth to humanity now. We have a responsibility to tell humanity that we are now in the apocalypse. This is the apocalypse. And if you can't see it and feel it, you're blind and dead. Because absolutely intractable and unspeakably ferocious crises, all interlinked, are now having a ferocious orgy in the world. We have a COVID pandemic which is clearly out of control. Omicron is only the latest of the varieties of variants, and there may very well be others that are much more deadly being incubated by the staggering ineptitude of our response. The very fact that Africa is largely unvaccinated, that Asia is largely unvaccinated. We have that. We have a pandemic. We are clearly in climate freefall. And as we talked a couple of weeks ago, we were both out of our minds with distress at the absolute failure of COP26 to address anything with any degree of seriousness.
That more than failing, it was underlining
Right.
the statement of the fossil fuel industry that they are actually putting their foot on the accelerator and they're
Yes.
not paying heed to anything.
Well, immediately COP26 ended, I was informed by my friends in Brazil that deforestation was higher in Brazil than for 15 years.
Yeah.
And it goes on and on. This is insanity. We're psychotic.
Yes.
And then you add to that that there are 1 million species on the edge of extinction.
Yeah.
And you add to that that the whole world economy is extremely brittle and can explode at any moment. And you add to that that there is a huge crisis of authoritarianism rising like a hydra all over the world, and especially in America.
Yes.
My God, we could very well have a fascist government here in the States, the incineration of democracy. And let's face it, just as I wrote in Savage Grace, if we have an American fascism, it will be worse than Nazism, because American fascism will have a servile media of unbelievable reach. It will have weapons of mass destruction, biological and atomic, and it will make sure that there'll be no global unity for any solutions to any of the now erupting global problems. Get real about where we are. And I am aghast at the majority of the teachers who are still going on business as usual.
Right.
Business as usual. The world needs to be alerted. And if it isn't alerted, we have no hope, because it's only by facing this situation, having the courage to really see it for what it is, that we have any hope of rising from the divine depths of ourselves, not only to do something about it, but to go through the kind of rigorous transformation we all need to go through to be strong enough to hold humanity to the possible birth that this great death could be preparing.
Yeah, so you do feel at the heart of this great terror, this multi-headed hydra, as you call it, on every level that's rising. Well, you know, what is the point of salvation? Where is the point of not just whimsical hope, but real edge that we work at to support this possible rebirth and renewing of the story, which clearly has to be an extremely radical remake. That wouldn't be surprising for those of us that have been on the edge of exploring and working towards embodying spiritual transformation. But for the mass of peoples that have been indoctrinated into a highly narcissistic, individualistic metaphor that is sort of forever on the teat of consumption, and have been disconnected from a deep embodied spirituality through the misapplication of religious metaphor in traditions. I mean, how do we make such a pivotal turnaround as this great shadow is bearing down upon us unrelentingly and with increasing speed?
Well, I'm going to turn that question to you, because one of the reasons why I have loved you so much and have such deep respect for you, and why I was so thrilled to help Time to Stand Up get published, is that I know that you're very aware of the intensity of the problem, and the intensity of the problem in Buddhism and in all of the Eastern modalities and in the New Age, obviously. But I also know that you've been working on an answer to that. And so I'd love to hear your answer and dance with your answer. Answer's the wrong word, your exploration of a possibility, because none of us have answers. We have possible directions.
Well, my journey is really, has been informed by a deep stripping away of the structures around the sense of individual self. That's the whole Buddhist shtick, really. And that has a great place in this exploration, but in a way, it's also seated in a fundamental split that I mentioned in Time to Stand Up, which is a split from the world of matter and the world of spirit.
Right.
It's endemic in all contemporary religious forms, and it's also disembowels the deep feminine and therefore the Shakti energy of radical eros and love and connection and deep compassion that is
and passion, real passion, divine passion.
Thank you for that piece. Yes, absolutely. So, it's clear to me that if we listen into the heart beneath the cognitive frames of the mind, if we listen, we're listening into a speaking intelligence. And that intelligence is deeply guiding, deeply alive, and deeply awakening us. And I feel, for me personally, that's the place that I refer to. And that's also taken me into a deeper exploration of indigenous knowledge. And,
yes.
and in that, realizing that these are peoples that never lost this deeply embodied earth connection, and that they must be the leading voice at this time. That all of us that have been shaped by centuries and millennia of the kind of split, this fundamental split that we have embodied through religious metaphor. And
it's an addiction to transcendence, isn't it?
The addiction to transcendence.
It's an addiction, and that addiction has induced a terrible schizophrenia in Hinduism and Buddhism. In the Buddha, I don't find it. And one of the wonderful conversations that I've had with Thanissara over the years has been about how in the original text you can find very clear indications that the Buddha took the body very seriously and embodying the principles of his extraordinary discoveries very intensely. And that it was also about the transformation of the body.
Well,
he
also wasn't just the internal body, but the external body of systems.
Right.
So he took on the caste system, for example, and overturned it, for which he was nearly killed. So we know that there's a massive precedent there for engaging. But, we see this transcendent metaphors, not just in the spiritual realm, but it's highly accentuated in the rational, scientific, considerate realm. So we see that encapsulated or demonstrated by these billionaires rushing off to space, burning up enormous amounts of oil in the process as our savior. You know, I mean, what more of a completely psychotic metaphor could you get than that, from where we actually need to return and where we need to look? We need to return to this deep connection with an insouled world, with an insouled sacred web of life, which has never really been destroyed in the understanding of indigenous knowledge. It was destroyed very deliberate in our, you know, trajectory of the Western world in particular, through this great split.
And not just through this great split, but through something else that I know alarms you as much as it alarms me, which is the search for private liberation. One of the most wonderful things about the evolution of Buddhism, for example, is that the original ideal of purely personal liberation was exploded in the most gorgeous way by the birth of the Bodhisattva awareness.
Yes.
And I remain absolutely enslaved by that ideal. It's the highest ideal we've ever been given in humanity. But I look around at the Buddhist teachers and I look around at the messages that they're giving, and of course the Dalai Lama is a massive exception to this, and I don't see any bodhisattvic penetration. I don't see any announcing of the need to abandon the search for private liberation and focus on becoming someone who is able to pour himself or herself out relentlessly, wisely, calmly to serve the birth of a new world. What are they doing?
Yes, that is a very good question. I think in the Buddhist world, we are massively unprepared for midwifing and responding to the enormity of what we're facing. I think even,
Massively.
you know, just on every level, not only the deepening of the Bodhisattva ideal and taking that on very seriously and teaching it and being it, but also, you know, how do we even, you know, the avoidance of even speaking to, the fear of upsetting people's peace, the inability of centers to really consider, as we all must, how are we going to respond in a world of constant crisis, you know, emergency response. That's what we're now moving into.
Well, it's with the centers have become spas for personal peace.
Yes.
That's nothing.
Yes.
They should be incubation chambers for bodhisattvic heroism of spirit.
Yes, yes, yes.
But
I agree with you, and I think one has to break. I think in part there's, you know, Buddhism has been always subsumed to some degree within. I mean, this goes back to its own roots of somewhat compromising itself in relationship to whatever sponsor is around at that
oh
time,
yes,
which is always the local power structure, whether it's
yes.
monarchy, whether it's kings, whether it's queens, you know, and it is really around the capitalist paradigm. You have to sell this stuff to keep your centers going, and you don't really sell apocalyptic bodhisattva work that easily. You know,
Tell me about it. Yes.
you know, to you know, the sort of the more rational scientific approach to individual mindfulness in service of, you know, bettering and furthering your company and your well-being, all of which is not to be sniffed at, but it's
No.
out of alignment with the need of
In an apocalyptic situation. But let's get back to something that I'd love to ask you to elaborate, because you know, I have loved your work for a long time. And when I came to visit you in South Africa, and that wonderful time we had in South Africa, you and Thanissara did a very long and gorgeous ceremony for Kuan Yin, a healing ceremony of Kuan Yin. And I was overwhelmed by the power of that ceremony. I went into it, you know, not skeptical, but open, but not expecting anything. And then suddenly, this wave of sacred feminine power flowed over the entire assembly, and I'd actually been very sick, and I was healed. by it. I have never, in fact, experienced so immediate a healing as I did in that ceremony. And I know that Kuan Yin has become absolutely central to both of yours and Kittisara's practice, and that this ceremony contains enormous relevance for this situation. So I'd love you to talk about how Kuan Yin brings a new flavor of radical healing.
It's a really important question. And I remember that ceremony. I remember that time. Actually, there is quite a big movement now, very open and interested in the Kuan Yin Dharmas. And I think it really does meet this confluence of the, the very premise of personal enlightenment is an erroneous premise, because
Right, there's no person to enlighten.
exactly. So, and I think this deep understanding of not emptiness as in there's nothing there, but emptiness
Right.
as the teacher that transmitted this ceremony to us, Master Chunhua, would say, it means absolutely everything is here.
Right. Purnam Purnamidam, the fullness.
The fullness, which is also in the Avalokiteshvara Kuan Yin, contemplation, is everything is resident intimately in this awareness. So
Right.
nothing is outside, even the monsters. So what are we
Right.
to do about that? We can't separate them out. Psychologically, you need to separate things out, boundaries, and we know that work is so important. But spiritually, in reality, that there are no defined boundaries.
Right.
As we see in quantum theory, and we know that the observer and the observer begin to merge and influence and co-create. And so this is the realm of Kuan Yin, is the one eternally listening. Kuan Yin really represents this deep bodhisattva heart, or is,
Right.
and
But a
that,
very particular flavor, very particular rasa, because what I experienced in that ceremony is what I can only call soft power. When Kuan Yin is present, there is this soft, penetrating, all-embracing, but very precise power of absolutely unconditional compassion that is totally transformatory and healing.
yes.
And that's why I think your promulgation of Kuan Yin and your building of this ceremony, you're taking it everywhere, is actually supremely important. And I beg you to continue, because it is one of the most powerful forms of the sacred feminine that I know.
Wow. Thank you for that endorsement. That's really encouraging, because I could see, and it is magical. There's a magical response.
Magical.
One of the lines in the ceremony is the way and the response are intertwined inconceivably. And it really is talking about this deep intelligence. Guan Yin starts to merge really with Pachamama, the deep intelligence of earth, the
Completely.
speaking world, the alive world of a multi-dimensional cosmology where there are beings, ancestors, spirit beings, elemental beings that are all part of this intimate awareness which we all inhabit. And
Well,
so,
that was very well experienced when we were all together, because we were together in your center in South Africa, which was on a Zulu sacred mountain.
yes, it is.
And the force of the mountain and the force of Kuan Yin were one force
Yes,
there. And
yes,
there was an enormous power of both very grounded and very transcendental healing coming through.
yes. Yes, and that's been one of our main offerings there in South Africa over decades, is doing those ceremonies, doing those mantras, doing those devotions. And the mountain responds. The mountain has let us know in so many ways how responsive it is. And as we even do those ceremonies, often the weather patterns
Yes.
around the mountain respond at very critical moments. These great flashes of lightning
And
and
the rain suddenly poured. Do
rain.
you remember that at the end of the
Yes.
ceremony there was this absolutely monumental rainstorm, and it felt as if we were being drenched by sacred blessing?
So this is one way, a very vital way, is to actually do ceremony at this time
Yes.
with this devotion and calling on all these forces and calling on this depth intelligence, which I do experience as the great grandmother, the great mother of all, the great compassion that birthed all, the great merciful one, the great fierce one. So these are the attributes of Kuan Yin's heart. And one could do that anywhere. We could do pilgrimages and do that outside of slaughterhouses. You could do it outside of oil refineries. You could do it, and in a way, it's not a direct attack on the actual, whatever you're doing it in relationship with, but it's an invitation into a whole different way of experiencing and holding our beingness in this world.
I love what you just said, because it's not an attack. It's a healing of all forms of pain and ignorance that drive people to do terrible stuff, as well as healing of the agony that those of us who really understand that it is terrible stuff experience. So it's a comprehensive, all-embracing healing that Kuan Yin is offering, and the Mother is offering.
I think as you're saying that, I think at some level, even the worst monsters, and there's many of them now, the most unconscious beings that have enormous power, is not that we don't come up against them and challenge them, which we must politically and in any way we can.
But not with hatred,
exactly.
with deepest compassion, because what you and I, and I'm sure many awake people know, is that if people are behaving like that, and they are, and there is real evil in what they're doing, and they could very well ensure the destruction of the planet, that's true. But if they're acting like that, they are in monumental pain. They're in such psychic suffering that any awake person should be aware of that and should be praying constantly for the healing of that and their release from those terrifying three poisons. The world is burning in the fire of hatred, craving, and ignorance, said the Buddha in the fire sermon. And what terrible fires to be burning in.
Yes.
That's why the Kuan Yin intelligence and the Bodhisattva intelligence is so important, because the Bodhisattva always knows that the darkest and most terrible people are in fact the most secretly afflicted, and he or she is on the earth for them as much as for the awake.
Beautiful. I would love to hear your thoughts about how you understand and feel and experience Kabir talking to this, holding the shadow, holding those that are embodying the means of destruction, like the Ravana character in the Ramayana that has great power, and yet it's ego power. How to transform that with the power of love, light, and healing.
Well, as you know, I've just produced this book in golden mint. Can I just be naughty and hold it up? In golden mint,
please do.
Which is 66 timeless poems of Kabir.
I've ordered it. So.
Oh, thank you, darling. And they're these three naughty little yogis.
They look wonderful.
They're totally wonderful. And they were just outside where I was staying in Benares. Kabir is absolutely relentless and ferocious in his critique of all those who choose power and not love. He's unspeakably angry at them, but that anger is always softened by a real heartbreak at what they are doing to themselves. There is a wonderful poem in which Kabir says, look, when Ravana ruled the world, it was all fine, and then he lost everything, and there was absolutely no one to help him at the end. Don't go into this kind of life. Look what happens. You seem to have it all, you seem to be able to command it all, but in the end you have nothing, and you'll only have to come and do the whole damn thing over again, God knows how many times. Are you crazy? See the craziness of the lust for power. So on the one hand, he's got a very fierce denigration of that. But on the other hand, he, like any truly enlightened person, Kabir is the Everest of mystical poets. He knows that people who choose that are committing soul suicide, and that is the worst thing a human being can do
Yes.
to themselves. And that's one of the reasons why Kabir is always screaming, "You idiots, wake up now! Don't you realize you're plunging into a fire that will only incinerate you?"
Yes.
That's what's so noble about his voice.
Yes. That is a very evolved place to come from, when most of us want revenge or want to see that person destroyed, and not really liberated. So to
I
try,
think that is the really disfiguring emotion now, and I unfortunately I see it in amongst many Democrats. It they The way many Democrats talk about Trump actually frightens me, because he's clearly a psychopath. We know that, and he's unbelievably corrupt, and the Republicans are unbelievably corrupt and extremely dangerous. But to exult in his humiliation is to join that terrible mindset.
right,
On the one hand, we need to pursue every just means to bring him and the rest of the thugs to justice. They have to be brought to justice. But can't we begin as deeply awake people to imagine ways in which bringing them to justice could be combined with a rugged compassion for the madness that they've let themselves be overtaken with, and with healing of that madness? Why can't we imagine healing so that the amazing powers of brilliance and intelligence that they have can be then turned to transformative instead of destructive purposes? The West seems incapable of this kind of.
a spirituality that's very much like a judging, revengeful God kind of
Right.
internalize that. But as you say that, because I actually feel quite vengeful sometimes, I would like to see Trump destroyed and humiliated if I'm talking in my lesser self. But I also feel what it does to me is it hooks me into this torturous kind of like relationship dependent on every quirk and turn that a being like that, and or the energies behind that being, that is using that being too, what their
Right.
agenda is. But when I go to the place that you're talking about, which I can do through this deeper contemplative work and
And through
deeper,
Kuan Yin, one can get
the
there.
part of the deeper, Guan Yin intelligence and the Pachamama guidance, then there's such an immutable power there that doesn't need to have to destroy anything or seek revenge. It's like things will unfold as they will unfold according to karma. But then there is the liberation to be able to love. And that is the most liberating point of consciousness that I have come across in the face of this enormous shadow. And when I look at all of those that have inspired me, and I like read like people in the midst of the Holocaust and these
Right.
horrific, nothing like what I'm experiencing in this very comfortable life I'm living, how some of them could bring forth, maybe because of what they were in, this immutable, shining heart. And
Ah,
and that's what lasts through time, isn't it? That's what we read about, that's what we
but
hear.
that's what enlightenment means. Did you ever read that prayer? I wish I could quote it. That was found on a piece of paper in Ravensbrück. And the prayer goes something like this: Please, O Lord, show your mercy not just to those of goodwill, but to those of evil will. And remember, when the evil come before you, all the qualities that suffering this horror have brought out in us, the courage, the generosity, the amazing compassion for each other. And when the evil stand before you, remember these and be kind to them.
Oh, yeah.
That to me is the enlightened consciousness.
Mm.
And in a situation that we're in, if you step back, you see that the Trumps and the Bezoses and the thugs and the crazies, all of them are playing a very distinct alchemical function. They're making humanity aware of the lethal power of the shadow that is coming up to be made conscious, to be healed by the sublime heart intelligence of the Divine Mother, Pachamama Kuan Yin. So they're playing an extraordinarily important part. And if we meet them with savagery and vengeance, then everything is lost. But if we meet them with that all-embracing understanding and deep prayerfulness for their liberation, then there is a very deep chance that we'll find our way into a new kind of healing.
Wow, but that's so hopeful, that's so beautiful, and that's so doable for us. We can
It is.
do this.
What else do our lives mean if that we don't do that?
I know.
The Dalai Lama prays every single morning. You know this, and I know this. He's spoken about this many times, and I've been there with him doing this. He prays for the Chinese. He prays with more intensity for the Chinese than he does for anyone else,
Yes,
because he knows just what danger they are in.
yes, yes.
And he knows that if he prays from that liberated bodhisattvic heart mind of his for them, there's a chance that they will be shifted within, and all the power that they're using for darkness can be used for light. There is no other way to go approach a situation as drastic as this.
And he does that after listening for decades and decades of people coming over that border, filing past him in McLeod with all the horror stories, imprisonments, tortures, separation, loss. And he still maintains, I mean, he is an emanation of Avalokiteshvara in that way. You know, you can see in this, and with such humor and such lightness, this, I mean, he is such an extraordinary example of holding that power.
He is. You remember from the Vajradhara Sutra, this extraordinary meditation on the bodhisattvic mind and heart. I must rescue all these beings from the stream of samsara. It's not just the good you're rescuing. It's not the Democrats you're rescuing. It's not the ones who agree with you about justice and the environment. You are pledged as a bodhisattva to rescue all beings. Right? I must rescue all these beings from the stream of samsara, which is so difficult to cross. I must pull them back from the great precipice. I must free them from all calamities. I must ferry them across the river of samsara. I myself must grapple with the whole mass of suffering of all beings. To the limit of my endurance, I will experience in all the states of woe found in any world system all the abodes of suffering, and I must not cheat all beings out of my store of merit. I am resolved to abide in each single state of woe for numerous eons, and so I will help all beings to freedom in all the states of woe that may be found in any world system whatsoever. Let us get real about that vow. That means in our situation that we must hold evil, we must recognize the evil in ourselves, the things that are these beings in us, and heal them constantly and call for grace for healing. But we must hold them in the deepest compassion and pray for their transformation, and never indulge in hatred and vengeance, while honoring the need for justice and challenging all the structures of cold evil. That requires a balance of soul that can only come through the deepest sacred practice and through real awakening.
Beautiful.
There is no other option now. And this is what should be being taught in the Buddhist centers. In the Buddhist centers, I believe what should be being taught are three things. That the Bodhisattva vow is the most sublime and the most difficult imaginable. That we are in the apocalypse, and that we don't have any more time not to become bodhisattvas in action. There is no time left. So we must really now stop using the practice as a lovely placebo so that we can be peaceful. That's good, that's the foundation, but we must wake up to the grandeur of what we have really undertaken in taking those vows, and incarnate and embody in our stream of consciousness and in the fearless heroic actions on behalf of justice that we selflessly take up.
Wow.
That true vow.
I just want to thank you so much, Andrew, for that. It was like the template going forward, and I'll share that. And
Then the other great, extraordinary quote, which I beg all Buddhists listening to memorize, is from Vimalakirti, and it's in Bob Thurman's matchless translation. And it says of the Bodhisattva, I'll say she generates the love that is firm, its high resolve unbreakable like a diamond, the love that is pure, purified in its intrinsic nature, the love that is even, its aspirations being equal, the saint's love that has eliminated its enemy. The saint's love
right.
that has eliminated its enemy. No enemy. No, I don't hate Trump. Trump is not my enemy. I'm agonizing about what he's doing. I want him to be held to justice. But more than him being held to justice, I long for the agony that has driven him to be this monster. I long for that to be healed. I pray for the healing of that.
Beautiful.
The Bodhisattva's love that continuously develops living beings, the love that is enlightenment because it is unity of experience, the love that is never exhausted because it acknowledges voidness and selflessness, the love that is morality because it improves immoral living beings. And so it goes on, page 77. This is, when you read those words, you realize just how milquetoast Buddhist teaching has become.
Yes.
It's lemonade. This is the most intense divine vodka ever.
Yeah. No, this is sort of like nuclear. What you're reading, it's nuclear.
It's nuclear, and it's
Energy. Yes.
and it's the sublime core of authentic Buddhism. This is the real stuff.
Yeah. Yes.
And there is no way out of that. When I took the Bodhisattva vows in Ladakh with my teacher, my great Buddha of a teacher, Tukse Rinpoche, he sat us all in his small, crumbling, ancient study, and he said, "Look," he said, "you better be aware of what you're taking on." And I was only 30. I was trembling, my God, he was saying, and he was looking very serious. He said, "Don't take these vows if you're not aware of what you're taking on. Don't just think, oh, I'll take the Bodhisattva vows today with a great teacher and that will ensure my private liberation." He said, that's not it at all. You are taking on the most difficult, the most heroic, the most transformative, imaginable vows, and you have to take them in awe and trembling.
Wow.
And you have to take them really begging for the grace to be even partially worthy of.
Oh, Andrew, this is so helpful. This is like such medicine. You're handing back the teachings to me and through this conversation that many will hear to give us a way through. This is the way through.
This is the way through.
That we have to, and then to connect it with the lineage, connect it with all these beings. They don't necessarily even be called Buddhist,
No, the prophet, peace be upon him, Jesus. We have these
I've been thinking
stupendous
about
examples.
Jesus, who is the Bodhisattva. I've been thinking about his resist not evil.
Right.
And this is really what we're talking about, is it not?
Right, because I think at the deepest level, Jesus knew that resisting evil would contaminate you with evil. It doesn't mean that you don't do everything as he so shatteringly bravely did to counter evil. But remember the words of the I Ching, the wisest words ever written, don't resist evil, but make energetic progress in the good. Use the horror of what's exploding out there not to get paralyzed and depressed and despondent, but to get so much more serious than you've ever been about your own inmost practice and your own sacred action, because by deepening your practice and being braver about your action, you make energetic progress in the good, and that heals the evil.
Yes.
It's the only force that can.
Yes. It's not something that we need to do or can do, but we can be a conduit through the prayer, through the real meaning of mindfulness, to turn the mind back into the deathless heart.
Right.
That deathless heart is deeply, our teacher Ajahn Chah called the living Dharma. It's deeply connected to this fountain of guidance and truth, and to let that guide us, and to let that mysterious power in this universe, which is unfathomably enormous, unfathomably undying, to heal. But we, in the Kogi peoples of Colombia, this is a peoples in the high Sierra Madre Mountains that were never colonized, and about them, but they talk about our job as being, our mind is being used by this intelligence they call Aluna, the Great Mother, for healing, for putting back in order and back in harmony. So then it's anattara in the truest sense of the world.
Right.
It's like allowing ourselves to be a conduit, and meeting that with this real mindful point of attention and prayerfulness and deep receptivity and deep listening, through which then transformation can happen. So this is like our consciousness then becomes a point of transformation for this work.
And not just our consciousness, because if you go back to the Bodhisattva vow, the Bodhisattva is not only awake in this divine consciousness, the Bodhisattva is relentlessly working in sacred action to transform the planet, to transform the world. The Dalai Lama's schedule would make a 17-year-old want to go into rehab.
That's true. It's, right action is part of the Eightfold Path. The Buddha's right action, he was out there trying to stop wars, he was guiding generals, he was overturning the caste system, he was overturning animal sacrifice. He went and stopped Angulimala, the most fearsome serial killer of that time.
I love that. That's my favorite. Why are you always running, Angulimala? Why can't you stop at that moment? When in your book, you make the point that, and it's so well taken, that the Buddha, like Jesus, was a social and political revolutionary.
Yes.
And that's one of the reasons why they tried to kill him. Devadatta tried to kill him 3 times, and there were many other attempts on his life, because he wasn't simply doing the usual guru thing. He was critiquing everything in terms of the revelation of emptiness and equality that he'd been given.
Which was extraordinary at that time. And how did this piece get lost in the transmission of the Dharma?
Well, through exactly what you said, through the fact that Buddhism became allied with power, as it got lost in Christianity. When Constantine made Christianity the core religion of the Roman Empire, he gutted the Christ consciousness from it, because the Christ consciousness is love in action, and the Bodhisattvic consciousness is compassion in action. But the powers that be want the love and the compassion, but not the action, and they don't want much of the love either. Isn't that what happened?
Yeah, that is exactly what happened. The alliance with power, and the lack of courage that it takes to take the leaps one needs to take for the spirit, and trust that one will be met in those leaps, and not to keep falling back on the structures of safety. And isn't that what this time is about? Those structures of safety are being stripped away, at great speed. And so
But there's a great blessing in that.
Mm.
There's a huge blessing in that. The illusions are being incinerated. The safeties are being incinerated. These corrupt alliances between spirituality and power are all breaking down. And you can scream and howl and fall on the floor if you want. It's of no use to do that. Why don't you take the amazing opportunity of that to get finally far more serious than you've ever been about sacred practice and the sacred action that flows from it naturally? Then you will be liberated and you liberate others, and energetic progress in the good will be made. And who knows that if enough of us do that in that spirit, how a force of transformation can be born that will birth a new world out of the ashes of the old. We don't know that that's certain. It's not certain, but because we have to do it. But if we do it, it will become amazing.
I really see the potential for alignment, particularly across faith traditions, to
Yes.
embody this peace and to do actions together from this consciousness.
Well, what's so wonderful what you said, because one of the things that I've been doing in the last 30 years is really being initiated into all the major traditions. But what I found in all of them is that they have a vision of precisely this kind of sacred action fueled by sacred practice and sacred consciousness. Islam has it in the absolutely glorious and amazing life of the Prophet, peace be upon him. And he's the supreme sacred activist. He was a king, a warrior, a mystic of the highest order, a prophet, a beautiful human being, unbelievable majesty and completeness. Jesus, when you see Jesus naked, so to speak, your breath is taken away. There is a completely awake, embodied divine human giving everything in the most radical and beautiful and holy way and transformative way. You see it at the heart of the great Kabbalists. They're great fusion of the deepest mystical consciousness with a radical vision of harmony and justice for all beings, including animals. You see it in Kabir, of all people, Kabir, who woke up to being engoldened to the next stage of human evolution, this engoldenment of mind and heart and soul and body. And what did he do? He didn't become rich. He was a poor beaver. He just gathered everybody around. He sang in Hindi so that everybody could get it, the cigarette sellers and the boatmen and the burners of the dead. And they adored him because they knew that he didn't feel superior to them. He knew that what had happened to him could happen to them. And he cried out against animal sacrifice, against the caste system, against all the fancy schmancy rosaries and fakerama of the gurus. And those are the people that we need to be guided by. And they're not depressed. They're not despondent. They're alive with calm joy because they know they're divine and they know what the divine is asking of them. And that is to give away everything all the time in clear, wise inner being and clear, wise outer action. It is really as simple as that, although enacting it is very hard. And it is time that we brought all these visions of sacred action together in one calm but monumentally passionate commitment to putting love and truth into action on every level in the world. And if we can do that, then we'll realize the secret meaning of this crisis, that it is a global dark night, but it has come to birth us into the next level of our potential evolutionary greatness, a humble, grand, tender, funny, wise embodiment of the divine here on earth. And we will either do it or not. If we don't do it, we'll die out. If we do it, and my life is dedicated to this, we do it, then there'll be a new human race, new wine in new bottles, and we will be so amazingly changed, chastened by tragedy, humbled by horror, awakened to our true nature, and given the ideal and rich fusion of deep practice and real action, which has always been the truth of the real divine human life. So let's get on with it.
Andrew, you're a real jewel. You're a real jewel in this time.
Thank you.
You're a real beloved friend to so many of us.
Darling.
And you're a beautiful guide. And I thank you so much for your inspiration, your affirmation, your encouragement, and your vision, which
Thank
is exactly right on. Thank you so much.